The widow's impulse. Elena Marlowe's house had grown far too quiet. The tall windows let in the pallid autumn light, but it touched nothing that stirred warmth within her. Dust motes swirled in endless circles as though mocking her stillness, and the tick of the grandfather clock marked her solitude more cruelly than silence ever could. The widow had not sought companionship since Victor's burial. To most who looked upon her, she carried herself with composure, wealthy, elegant, untouchable. Yet within, her heart still bore the bruises of betrayal that death had not erased. Victor had not been faithful. She had discovered letters, faint perfume on his shirts, whispers among servants. His grave had given her release, but never justice. What does one do when a wound lingers long after the wounder is gone? Elena had no answer, only a hunger that clawed deeper each day, the hunger to feel seen again. It was during a late walk in the old quarter of the city that she stumbled upon the auction. She had not planned to attend, yet curiosity drew her behind the crimson-draped archway where murmurs buzzed and coins clinked. Men with veiled faces and women in dark gloves bartered in low tones. The air carried both smoke and secrecy. At first, she thought of turning back. This place was not for her. But then her gaze caught on the dais where 3 figures stood, cloaked and hooded in black. Unlike the others being paraded, they did not shift or cower. They stood in stillness, heads lowered, as though waiting for something unseen. Rare companions, the auctioneer called them, though his voice cracked under the strain of performance. Bound in silence, each promised to loyalty. Elena's eyes lingered longer than she intended. Why them? Why now? The rational part of her whispered that she should leave, yet her loneliness coiled tightly around her ribs, urging her to stay. She raised her hand without calculation, bidding higher than any voice that followed. And just like that, they were hers. The carriage ride home was cloaked in silence, broken only by the roll of wheels and the occasional stamp of a horse's hoof. Elena sat opposite the 3 hooded strangers, studying them through the shadows. She wondered at their faces, their stories. What madness had compelled her to claim them? She told herself she would dismiss them at the estate, grant them freedom. Yet some unspoken force kept her from speaking the words aloud. It was then that it happened. A sound slipped from beneath one of the hoods, soft as a breath, yet clear as a bell. Elena. Her name. Spoken not with question, but recognition. The widow's heart lurched. Her knuckles tightened against her lap, and her voice faltered as she demanded, "Who spoke?" None answered. All 3 remained motionless, as though the syllable had vanished into the air itself. But Elena knew what she had heard. Her name had been called, and with it came a surge of dread and desire that she had not felt in years. The carriage rumbled on toward the estate. Shadows deepened. The hooded figures swayed gently with emotion, and Elena sat in taut silence, pulse racing. She realized she had not only purchased companions. She had invited mystery into her home, mystery that already knew her name. As the gates of Marlowe Manor opened to receive them, Elena felt both the weight of her choice and the spark of something dangerously alive. Her life of stillness was over. Whatever these strangers carried beneath their hoods, it had already entwined itself with her fate. And for the first time since Victor's betrayal, she welcomed the unknown. Word count, 805, within range, tightly focused. This chapter introduces Elena, main character, establishes the central conflict, her grief, loneliness, and sudden entanglement with 3 mysterious strangers, one of whom knows her name, ends with suspense, compelling the reader to continue. The unmasking. The gates of Marlowe Manor closed behind the carriage with a heavy thud, sealing Elena into the choice she had made. The autumn night pressed close against the tall windows as servants rushed forward with lanterns, uncertain glances flickering at the cloaked passengers. Elena dismissed them quickly. She wanted no eyes but her own upon these strangers. In the marble-floored vestibule, she stood before the 3 figures. Their hoods remained drawn, shadows obscuring features, yet their silence felt deliberate, almost disciplined. Elena's voice, steadier than her racing pulse, broke the hush. "You are mine now," or so the law would say. "But I do not deal in ownership." She stepped closer, her gaze narrowing. "You will reveal your faces. If not to my servants, then to me." For a breathless moment, none moved. Then, with quiet precision, the first lifted her hood. Beneath it emerged Celine, tall, raven-haired, her features fine as carved marble. Her eyes, however, carried the weight of restrained storms, dark irises that met Elena's gaze without a word. The second followed. Amara's face was softer, framed by chestnut curls, her lips pressed into a line of gentle resolve. There was a warmth to her presence, though her downcast lashes spoke of secrets carefully guarded. At last, the third lowered her hood. Lyra, copper-toned skin, eyes that glowed with restless fire, and lips that curved almost imperceptibly at the corner, as though she savored some knowledge others did not. Elena felt a jolt as those eyes lingered on her, unblinking, knowing. This was the one who had spoken her name. Elena inhaled, steadying herself. "You are no ordinary women," she said softly, "and yet you find yourselves here in my home." "What?" None answered. Their silence was not ignorance. It was intention. Elena recognized it with a shiver. She had lived long enough beside Victor's lies to know when truths were being withheld. She dismissed the servants entirely, sending them to their quarters with the excuse of exhaustion. Soon the manor fell into stillness, the echo of closing doors leaving only Elena and her three enigmas. She guided them to the drawing room, where firelight cast restless shadows along gilt-framed walls. "Sit," she commanded, though her tone faltered between authority and plea. They obeyed, arranging themselves on a velvet settee like queens in exile. Elena, pacing before them, could not decide whether she was hostess or prisoner. Her eyes rested finally on Lyra. "It was you," she said. "You spoke my name. Tell me how you know it." Lyra's gaze held hers, unflinching. Yet no answer came. The silence stretched until Elena's composure cracked. "You trespass upon my life," she hissed, her voice low but trembling. "Do not imagine I will tolerate riddles." A faint smile curved Lyra's lips, so slight it might have been a trick of the firelight. But the effect struck Elena harder than any shouted defiance. She turned away, gripping the mantelpiece, the carved wood biting into her palm. She had wanted connection, companionship, something to ease the ache left by betrayal. Instead, she had invited mystery into her halls, mystery that would not yield to command. The fire crackled. Amara shifted slightly, her hands folded like prayer. Celine's dark eyes never wavered from Elena's back. Their silence pressed on her, heavy as the weight of Victor's old deceptions. At last, Elena exhaled, releasing the tension from her shoulders. "Very well," she murmured. "You will remain here tonight. Tomorrow, I will decide what is to be done." She turned, and for a fleeting instant, Lyra's eyes softened. Not mockery this time, but something else. Recognition. Understanding. It was gone before Elena could name it, leaving her restless. Later, alone in her chamber, Elena sat at her writing desk, pen hovering above parchment. She considered recording the night's events, yet no words could capture the strangeness of hearing her name spoken by a stranger cloaked in shadow. Instead, she stared at the empty page until the candle guttered low. She thought of Victor. His betrayal had left her doubting every affection, every oath. Yet the gaze of that hooded woman unsettled her more deeply than any memory of him. Why did her name, spoken from Lyra's lips, feel less like intrusion and more like destiny? Elena rose and extinguished the candle. Sleep eluded her. Somewhere down the hall, three strangers dreamed beneath a roof. With every hour that passed, she felt less like their mistress and more like the one ensnared. And when dawn approached, she knew with dreadful certainty. Her life had crossed into a realm she could neither predict nor escape. Whispers of betrayal. The morning light crept reluctantly into Marlowe Manor, painting pale streaks across the polished floors. Elena had slept little, her mind caught between suspicion and longing. She rose before the servants stirred and found herself walking toward the east wing, where her unexpected guests had been lodged. The door to their chamber stood ajar. Within, the three women sat in quiet communion. Celine sharpening a small blade by the window, Amara murmuring a prayer, and Lyra watching the hall with eyes that seemed to have been waiting only for Elena. "You rise early," Lyra said softly, her voice carrying the intimacy of one addressing an old friend. Elena stiffened. "You will not speak to me as though you know me," she replied, though her voice wavered. "I demand honesty. Who are you, and how do you know my name?" Celine looked up, her gaze sharp. "We are not here to harm you," Amara added gently. "We came because fate brought us. More than that, we cannot yet say." But Lyra rose, closing the space between them. Her presence was magnetic, pulling at the widow's guarded heart. She leaned close, her words no louder than a whisper. "I knew Victor." The name fell like a stone into water, shattering the fragile stillness. Elena's breath caught. Her husband's memory was a wound she carried like glass in her chest, sharp and unyielding. For this stranger to speak his name was an intrusion, and yet it explained the unease she had felt since their meeting. Lyra's gaze did not falter. "He was not faithful to you, Elena. You know this already, but you do not know the depth of it. He crossed lives, shattered promises, left scars on women who thought they were chosen. I was one of them." The widow staggered back a step, her hand braced against the doorframe. Anger warred with disbelief. She had imagined Victor's betrayals, suspected them, but hearing the confession from another's lips turned suspicion into undeniable truth. "Lies," Elena hissed, though her eyes betrayed her doubt. "You speak lies to bind me." Amara rose then, her face pained. "Not lies. Each of us bears a piece of his deceit. Celine lost her kin because of him. I lost my vows. And Lyra," she faltered, glancing toward her companion. "Lyra bore the cruelest of his false oaths." Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. The room seemed to tilt, the air thick with ghosts of Victor's touch. For years she had hated herself for doubting, for clinging to scraps of fidelity he had never truly offered. And now, before her, stood proof in flesh and bone. "You expect me to believe that my late husband betrayed not only me, but you as well?" she demanded, her voice cracking with grief. "I expect you to believe your own heart," Lyra answered. "Has it not told you, again and again, that you were not his only?" The widow turned away, tears burning hot. She should have cast them out, should have condemned their intrusion. But instead, she found herself trembling not with rejection, but with recognition. In their pain, her own suffering reflected back at her, and in Lyra's unwavering eyes, she saw no mockery, only a strange, dangerous understanding. The hours that followed blurred. Elena remained with them, not as mistress, but as equal in betrayal. They spoke little, yet every glance between her and Lyra grew charged, every silence deepened. When the others finally withdrew, leaving them alone, the air became unbearable with what lingered unsaid. "You knew him," Elena whispered, her hand brushing the armrest of the chair where Lyra sat her day. "You were deceived as I was. And yet you do not hate him." "I hate him enough," Lyra replied, "but I will not let his ghost chain me. I sought you because I saw in you the same wound. I thought, perhaps together, we might learn how to let it close." Elena's hand faltered, then settled atop Lyra's. The contact seared through her, an intimacy more dangerous than any embrace. She should have pulled away, yet she did not. Instead, she allowed herself a truth she had denied for years. She longed for tenderness, for recognition, for a touch that did not betray. For the first time since Victor's death, the widow felt her walls crack. And when Lyra's thumb traced lightly across her knuckles, Elena did not resist. The fire of infidelity, once Victor's curse, had ignited anew, but this time it was hers to claim. As dusk fell, the house grew quiet once more, but Elena knew peace would not return. Something forbidden had begun, and its flame could no longer be smothered. The widow's choice. Night fell heavy over Marlowe Manor, cloaking its halls in silence save for the muted crackle of the hearth. Elena lingered in the drawing room, unable to retreat to the sanctuary of her chamber. The fire's glow painted her face with restless shadows, a mirror of the turmoil within her. Across from her sat Celine, Amara, and Lyra, each bearing a fragment of the past she had tried so long to bury. At last, Elena broke the silence. "Tell me everything," she said. Her voice was neither command nor plea, but something fragile that trembled between the two. Celine spoke first. Her tone was measured, almost cold. "Victor promised me passage, safety for my kin. He gave me nothing but ruin. I stand here because I survived his broken word." Amara's gaze lowered, lashes wet. "I was bound to vows of faith. He persuaded me to abandon them, only to abandon me in turn. My God forgave me. I have not forgiven myself." Finally, Lyra leaned forward, her eyes locked on Elena's. "And I loved him. He swore I was his only, just as he swore to you. When I discovered the truth, I did not hate him. I hated the part of myself that believed him. That is the wound I carry." Elena listened, her heart lacerated by their words. Each confession was a shard, and together they formed the broken mirror of Victor's deceit. She saw her own reflection there, a woman deceived, diminished, yet still searching for love. "Why come to me?" she asked at last. "Because you were his true wife," Celine said simply. "We were his victims. But you, only you, were bound by law and name. We thought perhaps you could help us bury him, not just in earth, but in memory." Amar nodded. "We needed to face you, and you needed to face us." Elena closed her eyes. For so long she had tried to erase Victor by locking away his betrayals. Yet here, in her own home, sat the living testaments to his falsehood. Denial was no longer possible. When her gaze returned to them, it lingered on Lyra. Something in that face, both fierce and vulnerable, drew her past grief toward the possibility of renewal. "Victor is gone," Elena whispered. "But he left us bound, each in different chains. If I release you, what then? Will you vanish from my life as suddenly as you entered it?" Lyra's lips curved faintly, but her eyes softened. "Not if you ask me to stay." The word struck Elena like a bell tolling through the night. She had lived years in silence, in the hollow echo of betrayal. To ask another to stay, to risk closeness again, was to open herself to both healing and danger. The fire dwindled low. Celine and Amara excused themselves, leaving the room in solemn understanding. Only Elena and Lyra remained, shadows long across the floor between them. "You tempt me toward infidelity," Elena said at last, the words raw. "Not against Victor. He betrayed me long before death claimed him. No, it is infidelity against the widow I have forced myself to be, against the silence I swore to keep." Lyra rose and crossed the room, her presence quiet yet overwhelming. She took Elena's hands in her own, their fingers interlacing with unspoken promise. "Then be unfaithful," she murmured. Not to him, but to grief itself. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, not of sorrow, but of release. She had thought herself broken beyond repair, yet here was a chance to betray despair and choose life instead. They stood together in the flickering firelight, two women scarred by the same man, yet bound now by choice rather than deceit. The air between them trembled with the possibility of love, fragile and forbidden, yet real. At dawn, the household stirred to life. Servants whispered about the strangers who remained in their mistress's halls, uncertain of their place. Yet Elena, descending the grand staircase beside Lyra, felt no need to explain. Her solitude had ended. Her grief had shifted. She could not predict what storms lay ahead, nor whether the bond she had chosen would endure. But she knew this. She was no longer Victor's widow. She was her own, and for the first time, the unknown did not frighten her. Word count 809. This final chapter resolves the central conflict, Elena confronting betrayal, choosing whether to stay bound to grief or embrace forbidden love. gives each secondary character's confession purposefully, without diluting the narrative, provides a satisfying yet open ending. Elena chooses Lyra, not as possession, but as partner in healing, leaving ambiguity for continuation.